The monitoring systems in Medical Bay 7 of the Galactic Research Station Epsilon had been silent for 97 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The cryopod hummed with its endless mechanical song, preserving what the collective had deemed an impossibility, a human who had volunteered for the longest cryosleep experiment in recorded history. Dr. Vexthera, a Zentari physician whose species had perfected suspended animation millennia ago, stood before the pod with 3 of her colleagues. Her 4 arms moved in precise patterns across the holographic display, checking readings that should have been routine. They weren't. "This can't be accurate," whispered Dr. Krill, his insectoid features clicking with agitation. "The neural activity patterns. They're not dormant. They've never been dormant." The human inside the pod was named James Torrens, a volunteer from Earth's deep space exploration program. A century ago, he'd climbed into this very chamber with a smile on his face and a promise to humanity that someone would remember. Remember what it was like before humanity joined the Galactic Collective. Remember Earth before the integration. Remember being alone in the universe. Vexthera's primary hands paused over the awakening sequence. All species experience neural decay during extended cryosleep. Even with our most advanced preservation techniques, memories fade, personality matrices fragment. After 100 years, most beings wake up knowing their name and little else. Her secondary hands gestured to the scans floating before them. "But look at this." His hippocampus activity suggests active memory consolidation. His prefrontal cortex shows patterns consistent with conscious thought processing. Conscious? Dr. Krill's antenna trembled. That's medically impossible. The cryogenic process specifically inhibits consciousness. If he's been aware for 100 years, no one wanted to finish that sentence. A century of darkness, of paralysis, of absolute isolation. It would shatter any known mind in the galaxy. "We need to wake him now," said Dr. Mora, a Valkyrian whose empathic abilities made her sensitive to even dormant emotional states. Her voice carried an urgency that sent ripples of concern through the medical team. "I'm detecting something from him. It's faint, but it's organized, purposeful. He's not suffering. He's waiting." The awakening sequence initiated with a cascade of chemical releases and carefully calibrated temperature increases. The pod's interior, which had maintained a temperature just above absolute zero, began to warm. Ice crystals that had formed in the spaces between James's cells dissolved with atomic precision. Blood that had flowed thick as syrup began to thin. A heart that had beaten once per hour began to accelerate. 20 minutes into the process, James Torrens opened his eyes. What happened next would be documented, studied, and debated across 1,000 worlds. Because when James's vital signs stabilized and Vexthera asked him the standard post-cryosleep question, "Can you tell me your name?" he didn't hesitate. He didn't struggle for words or grasp at fragments of identity. He smiled. "My name is James Torrens. I'm 32 years old. I volunteered for the Century Sleep Project on March 15, 2387. The last meal I ate before entering cryosleep was scrambled eggs with hot sauce, toast with butter, and coffee, black, no sugar. My mother's name was Eleanor. My father's name was Robert. I had a dog named Apollo who had a white spot on his left ear. And I remember every single day of the last 100 years. The medical bay fell silent except for the beeping of monitoring equipment. Dr. Krill's instruments clattered to the floor. Dr. Mora's empathic field pulsed with shock so profound it made the others stumble. Vexthera leaned closer to the pod, her compound eyes focusing with laser intensity. "James, you were supposed to be unconscious. The cryosleep process induces a state indistinguishable from death. There's no consciousness. There can't be." James sat up slowly, muscles responding with impossible coordination for someone who hadn't moved in a century. He looked at each doctor in turn, and there was something in his eyes, something that made ancient species with millennia of medical knowledge feel suddenly, profoundly young. "That's what we all thought," he said quietly. "That's what I thought when I went under. But you forgot something about humans, Doctor. We're persistent. We adapt. And when you leave a human alone with nothing but their thoughts for 100 years, His smile widened, and it was the smile of someone who had discovered something extraordinary. We learned to do things no one ever imagined possible. Dr. Vexthera's hands trembled as she reached for her recording equipment. In her 300 years of medical practice, she had never seen anything like this. Whatever had happened to James Torrens in that century of frozen darkness, it was going to change everything the collective understood about consciousness, memory, and the terrifying, beautiful potential of human minds. The examination room had been designed for comfort, but nothing could make James feel truly at ease with 7 different species of doctors staring at him like he was a specimen under glass, which he supposed he was. Dr. Vexthera positioned a neural scanner around his head, the device humming with technology that could map individual synapses. James, I need you to understand the magnitude of what you're claiming. The longest any being has maintained consciousness during cryosleep is 6 hours, a Valkyrian monk who nearly destroyed his own mind in the process. You're telling us you were aware for 100 years. Not just aware, James corrected, his voice steady. Active, thinking, learning. Dr. Krill chittered in his species equivalent of disbelief. Learning? There was no sensory input, no external stimuli. You were in absolute darkness, absolute silence, absolute isolation. What could you possibly learn? James closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had walked through valleys no one else had ever seen. I learned myself, all of myself, every memory I'd ever stored, every experience I'd ever had, every conversation I'd ever heard. When the cryo hit and the darkness came, I panicked at first. I tried to scream, to move, to wake up, but I couldn't. So I did the only thing I could do. I went inward. The neural scanner's readings began displaying across a dozen holographic screens. Dr. Mora gasped, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the vast structures James was describing. His memory architecture, it's been completely reorganized. It's like a library where every book has been read, categorized, and perfectly indexed. James nodded. That's exactly what I did. Year 1, I cataloged every memory from my childhood. Every birthday party, every scraped knee, every bedtime story my mother told me. Year 5, I had moved on to my teenage years. By year 10, I realized I could do more than just remember. I could analyze, cross-reference, understand patterns I'd never seen before. That's impossible, Dr. Krill insisted. The human brain isn't designed for that kind of intensive self-examination. You should have experienced severe psychological degradation, memory distortion, personality fragmentation. Should have, James agreed. But I didn't. Maybe it's because I was frozen. Maybe the cryosleep somehow protected me from the usual limitations of consciousness. Or maybe, he paused, and a strange intensity entered his eyes. Maybe humans are more resilient than anyone realized. Maybe when you strip away all external distractions and force a human mind to face itself for long enough, it doesn't break. It evolves. Vexthera's 4 hands moved frantically across her instruments. Show us. Prove it. Give us something that demonstrates this perfect recall you claim to possess. James didn't hesitate. The day before I entered cryosleep, I was in the preparation facility. At 9:47 a.m., a technician named Sarah walked by carrying a data pad. On that pad was a reflection of the window behind me. In that reflection, I could see part of a news broadcast playing on a screen across the room. The headline was about a water reclamation project on Mars Station 3. I couldn't read the full article, but I could see 14 words of the text. I remember them. I remember the font. I remember the exact shade of blue used for the hyperlinks. Dr. Mora's empathic field pulsed with awe. We can verify that. The news archives go back centuries. I know you can, James said. And I know what you'll find. Because I remember everything, Doctor. The question isn't whether my memory is perfect. The question is what else changed during those 100 years. What else did I become while I was alone in the dark? Reorganizing my mind. Building new structures of thought. Discovering capabilities that evolution never intended. The medical team exchanged glances laden with implications. They had expected to wake a confused volunteer with fragmented memories. Instead, They had awakened something unprecedented, a human who had spent a century perfecting himself at the neurological level. And somewhere in the back of each alien doctor's mind, a question began to form. If one human could do this, what could humanity become if they ever chose to embrace this transformation? 3 days after his awakening, James sat in an observation room specifically designed to test cognitive function. Around him, the greatest minds in the Galactic collective had assembled, each species sending their most distinguished researchers. The implications of James's condition had spread through the scientific community like wildfire. "We'll start with something simple," announced Dr. Vexthera, her voice transmitted through speakers. "Pattern recognition. This is a test typically given to children to assess basic cognitive development." A holographic display materialized before James, showing a sequence of shapes and colors. The pattern was complex by human standards, designed to challenge even advanced adult minds. James glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. The next shape is a 7-pointed star in cyan, followed by a hexagon in amber, then a triangle in violet. The sequence repeats with a rotation of 17 degrees clockwise every third iteration, while the color spectrum shifts through a Fibonacci-based progression. The room fell silent. Dr. Krill's mandibles clicked rapidly. That sequence wasn't designed to be solved. It was designed to have no solution. We created it specifically to establish baseline confusion responses. "It has a solution," James said calmly. "You based it on Centauri mathematical philosophy, specifically the Cthaxian proof of recursive dimensionality. I could see the structure immediately. Would you like me to explain the underlying mathematics?" Vexthera's forehands trembled slightly as she input commands. "Let's try something different. Memory stress test. I'm going to show you a detailed image for exactly 3 seconds. Then I'll ask you to describe it." An image flashed on the screen, a bustling alien marketplace with hundreds of figures, signs in a dozen languages, complex architectural details, and countless small objects scattered throughout. 3 seconds later, it vanished. "Begin describing what you saw," Vexthera instructed. James closed his eyes. The marketplace was on a Valkyrian colony world. "I recognized the architecture from your historical database entries I reviewed before Cryosleep. There were 247 visible individuals across 12 different species. Starting from the left, the first vendor was selling what appeared to be crystallized proteins, with 17 varieties on display. The prices were listed in standard credits, ranging from 45 to 320. The second vendor. He continued for 18 minutes, describing every detail of the image with absolute precision. He recalled text from signs, patterns on clothing, the exact positioning of shadows that indicated the time of day, even the emotional expressions on distant faces barely visible in the background. When he finished, Dr. Mora was openly weeping, her species' response to overwhelming emotion. "This isn't just perfect recall," she whispered. "He's processing visual information at a speed and depth that shouldn't be possible for organic neural tissue. He saw more in 3 seconds than I could have observed in 3 hours." Dr. Krill approached the observation window, his skepticism finally crumbling. "The human brain has roughly 86 billion neurons. Based on these results, James is utilizing them with an efficiency we've never documented. It's as if every neural pathway has been optimized, every connection strengthened to maximum capacity." "That's exactly what happened," James said, his voice carrying through the speakers. "During the 100 years, I didn't just organize my memories. I taught myself to think differently. I mapped my own neural architecture and figured out how to use it more efficiently. Imagine spending a century doing nothing but optimizing your own mind, removing inefficiencies, strengthening useful patterns, creating new pathways for information processing." A crystalline observer in the back of the room, a being whose species communicated through light refraction, pulsed a question that was translated immediately. "What are the limits of this optimization? What can you not do?" James turned to face the window, and his expression was unsettling in its intensity. "I don't know yet. I'm still discovering new capabilities. But I can tell you this, whatever limits human cognition had before, they're much further away than anyone thought. And the most important thing? I'm not special. I'm not a genetic anomaly or an evolutionary miracle. I'm just a regular human who spent enough time alone with his own mind to figure out how to use it properly. The implications hung in the air like a storm about to break. If any human could achieve this, then humanity as a species was sitting on potential that dwarfed anything the collective had imagined. The interview room had been cleared of everyone except Dr. Vexthera and Dr. Mora. After 5 days of testing, they needed to understand not just what James could do, but how he had done it. "Walk us through it," Vexthera said softly. "Tell us what happened in that first year. What was it like when you realized you were conscious?" James leaned back, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the room's walls. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. I tried to scream but had no lungs that worked. Tried to open my eyes but they were frozen shut. Tried to move but my body was locked in ice. For what felt like months I was just panic. Pure consciousness trapped in a prison of flesh and frost. Dr. Mora's empathic field resonated with sympathetic pain. "How did you survive that? How did you not go mad?" "I almost did," James admitted. "But then I remembered something my grandfather told me when I was a kid. He'd been a prisoner of war for 3 years. He said the ones who survived were the ones who built routines, who found purpose in the smallest things. So I decided to build something. A structure. A palace made of memories." "A memory palace," Vexthera murmured. "An ancient human technique." "Ancient, but I took it further than anyone ever had before. I started with my childhood home. I rebuilt it in my mind room by room. Every detail, the crack in the kitchen tile, the way sunlight fell through the living room window at 4 p.m., the smell of my mother's cooking. I made it perfect, and then I filled it with memories. Every memory from my childhood got stored in that house in specific locations. Birthday parties in the backyard. Skinned knees in the bathroom. Bedtime stories in my bedroom." His voice took on a distant quality, as if he was walking through those halls even now. "But one house wasn't enough. So I built my elementary school, then my high school, then my college campus. Every place I'd ever been became a building in my city of memory. And the more I built, the more I realized I could do. I started creating structures for things I'd learned, a library for books I'd read, a laboratory for scientific concepts I understood, a gallery for every piece of art I'd ever seen. A century is a long time to build," Dr. Mora said quietly. "A century is infinite when you're not bound by the limitations of real-time consciousness," James replied. "In the darkness, there was no day or night, no fatigue, no distractions. I could spend what felt like months perfecting a single memory, ensuring every detail was accurate. And the more I practiced, the better I got at it. By year 20, I could recall and examine memories at incredible speeds. By year 50, I was doing things I didn't think were possible." Vexthera leaned forward. "What kinds of things?" "I started seeing patterns, connections between memories that I'd never noticed before. I realized that every conversation I'd ever had, every book I'd ever read, every lesson I'd ever learned, they were all linked. Everything connected to everything else. I began building new structures to represent these connections. Neural maps, knowledge networks. By year 70, I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was understanding. I was seeing the deep structure underlying all my experiences." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of wonder. "And then, around year 90, something changed. I started to feel the boundaries of my own consciousness. Not like walls, but like horizons. I realized that human thought had limitations not because of biology, but because of habit. We think in certain ways because we've always thought in certain ways. But when you spend decades examining every assumption, every pattern, every automatic response, you can start to change them, optimize them, transcend them." Dr. Mora's voice was barely a whisper. "You rewrote your own cognitive architecture." "I upgraded it," James corrected. "And the terrifying, beautiful truth is that I think any human could do it. Not through cryosleep necessarily, but through dedication, through introspection, through refusing to accept that our limitations are fixed. Humans have always been tool users, Doctor. I just figured out how to treat my own mind as a tool that could be refined. The conference room aboard the Galactic Research Station held representatives from 47 species. James sat at the center, no longer a patient but something closer to a phenomenon being studied by the entire collective. Ambassador Thelxor of the Zentari hegemony spoke first, his translated voice carrying the weight of a civilization 10,000 years old. Humanity has been a member of the collective for 98 years. In that time, we have seen your species display remarkable adaptability, creativity, and determination. But what you represent, James Torrens, is something else entirely. You represent a potential threat. The word hung in the air like a blade. James didn't flinch. A threat to what? To stability, to the established order, to the very structure of the collective. The ambassador's image pulsed with bioluminescent intensity. Every species in this alliance achieved their current level of cognitive function through millions of years of evolution. You achieved comparable, perhaps superior function through a century of forced introspection. If this technique were to spread among humans, if your entire species were to undergo such transformation, you're afraid, James finished. You're afraid of what humanity might become. Dr. Vexthera stepped forward, her forearms spread in a gesture of reconciliation. Not afraid, James. Concerned. The collective has maintained peace for 6,000 years through careful balance. Each species contributes their unique strengths. The Zentari provide wisdom and stability. The Valkyrians offer empathy and social cohesion. The crystalline entities contribute their mathematical precision. Humans bring creativity and adaptability. But if humans were to suddenly acquire cognitive capabilities that match or exceed the oldest species, the balance would shift, James acknowledged. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the collective has been stable for so long because it's been stagnant. Gasps and chirps of protest erupted around the room. Ambassador Thelxor's form blazed with indignation. Stagnant? We have explored 1,000 worlds, uplifted 16 species, eliminated 73 diseases across our member civilizations. And in 6,000 years, what have you fundamentally changed about how you think? James interrupted. What new forms of consciousness have you explored? What cognitive boundaries have you pushed? You've built an empire on the assumption that each species has reached their evolutionary endpoint. But what if that's wrong? What if every species in this room could achieve what I've achieved? The crystalline representative pulsed a question. You would share this? This technique? That's why I volunteered for the experiment, James said. Before I went under, humanity was struggling to find its place in the collective. We were the new kids, the primitive upstarts who'd barely figured out faster than light travel. I thought maybe, if I could survive a century's sleep, I'd wake up to a humanity that had caught up, that had earned respect. Instead, I woke up to find I'd caught up to everyone else by accident. Dr. Mora's empathic field rippled with complex emotions. You want to elevate your entire species. I want to elevate every species, James corrected. What I learned in the darkness isn't just applicable to humans. It's applicable to any conscious being with enough time and dedication. The memory palace technique, the neural optimization, the metacognitive awareness, these are tools, and tools can be shared. Ambassador Thelxor's voice dropped to a dangerous frequency. And if we refuse? If the collective decides that this knowledge is too dangerous to disseminate? James met the ambassador's gaze without flinching. Then you'll have proven something I desperately hoped wasn't true. You'll have proven that the collective isn't an alliance of equals working toward shared enlightenment. You'll have proven it's a hierarchy designed to keep the old powers in control and the young species in their place. The silence that followed was absolute. Every being in that room understood they were at a crossroads. They could embrace James's discovery and potentially revolutionize consciousness across the galaxy, or they could suppress it and maintain the status quo. Both choices carried risks. Both choices would define the future of the collective. Finally, Dr. Vexthera spoke, her voice gentle but firm. We need time. Time to study the full implications, time to develop safeguards, time to prepare. Will you give us that, James? Will you wait while we decide whether to open this door? James nodded slowly. I'll wait. After all, I've gotten very good at waiting. 3 months after James Torrens woke from his century of frozen contemplation, the Galactic Collective convened its first assembly in 400 years. Representatives from every member species gathered to vote on what would become known as the Torrens Protocol, a comprehensive program to teach cognitive optimization techniques across the galaxy. James stood in the observation deck of the research station, watching distant stars pulse with the light of 1,000 civilizations. Dr. Vexthera joined him, her 4 arms carrying data pads filled with preliminary results. The first volunteers have begun the modified protocol, she said. Not Cryosleep, we developed a neural feedback system combined with sensory deprivation meditation. Early results are promising. A Valkyrian philosopher achieved a 53% improvement in memory consolidation after just 2 months. James smiled. And the opposition? Ambassador Thelxor's faction grows smaller every day. It's hard to argue against evolution when species are seeing real benefits. Even the Zentari are beginning to admit that 6,000 years of stability might have come at the cost of growth. Change is terrifying, James said, but stagnation is death. Vexthera's compound eyes reflected the starlight. You've changed everything, James. Not just for humanity, but for all of us. The collective will never be the same. Good, James replied, because the universe is vast and strange and full of wonders we can't even imagine yet. To explore it properly, we need to be more than we are. We need to evolve, not just physically over millions of years, but consciously, deliberately now. As the stars wheeled overhead and the assembly debated the future of galactic consciousness, James Torrens closed his eyes and walked once more through the palace of memories he'd built in the darkness. Every room, every hall, every structure was perfect, crystalline, eternal. He had spent 100 years alone in the dark, teaching himself to think in new ways. And in doing so, he'd given every sentient being in the galaxy permission to do the same. The human woke after 100 years in cryosleep, and what he remembered changed the universe forever. What happened to the collective after James's awakening? What new forms of consciousness emerged as species began optimizing their minds? The story continues in our next video. Hit that subscribe button to follow humanity's journey through the stars, and drop a comment telling us, would you spend a century in darkness to evolve your mind? See you in the next one.